Hello everyone, welcome to my next video, and pretty much today what we're going to be looking towards is situational judgment. So pretty much this is going to be the fifth video out of all 5 videos that I'm going to be producing in terms of just simply giving you guys advice and tips on general sections and introductions as well to those sorts of sections. Of course, there's going to be other videos about, say, just like a general UCAT introduction, which I actually forgot to make overall, and also just the other mental health and just general tips as well. But when it comes to the actual specific crash course run-throughs and everything, it's going to be the final one of the actual series that I'm producing. And yeah, hopefully it can be a relatively smooth video and you guys have actually gotten a lot out of this learning because I've put in a lot of effort to actually making these PowerPoints. In fact, just before this, I actually spent like 3 hours making the situational judgment one and also just confirming a lot of the data and sources that I've had from my other students. So yeah, before I actually just get officially started, I just want to say as well, I'm just not very happy with the lighting. So I'm actually using the same camera, but the lighting I'm noticing is just like a little bit different. And that's why, because it's nighttime and I don't have like the natural light that I have from like daytime that I usually use for my blinds, through my blinds and everything. It's actually right now 10:52 p.m. on the 31st of December, so New Year's Eve. So I'm actually just going to finish recording this video. I'm going to upload it online and then I'm just going to end up just going and actually just watching the fireworks on TV. I would actually normally hang out, but the thing is that everyone's got their own sort of New Year's plans with their own families, and also it's just like a bit of a mess to actually hop on and just get a public transport. Like I'd rather just go ahead and just go home and recharge and sleep. But anyways, that's not really a worthwhile thing to talk about right now. I just want to get into the actual video because I do think this one could be a relatively long one as well. So I'm just going to share my screen. There you go. So there should be the actual PowerPoint. So this is the UCAT Situational Judgment Introduction. Alrighty, and I just want to remind you all as well, just before I actually get started, as I do with every single lesson, that I do actually offer online private or group tutoring, and this can be done in real life as well. If you happen to be close enough, it can recruit enough students. Pretty much it's just going to be tutoring from me directly as well. And if you actually are interested in that, you can just go on the Tutor Finder page right there. There'll be a link in the description as well. And also just simply just click that link or just type that link in the bar and you'll be able to get tutoring from me and just find about my credentials more specifically, and also just message me with any sort of questions you have if you happen to have any sort of issues with the actual UCAT or anything like that. You can just use those details to ask me for some advice. Also, you get a discount for having come from YouTube. I'm very glad to offer discounts to people who actually come from YouTube as well, because I'm very happy to actually get some more students by who've actually looked and come to me for help through that. Okay, so without further ado, it's the UCAT Situational Judgment Introduction. And let's get started. So this is the quick lesson overview and everything. So our main teaching points are just going to be the general premise and structures, always, question types, the timing, and I'm telling you guys, you can relax with the section, talk about it later. Marking, what you need to score, you can just do all right, and also the final summary. So we can go through exactly what those little extra bracket points mean and everything later, but they're just like little introductions and everything. It's quite a generic standard sort of lesson structure and everything in terms of the actual teaching points. But yeah, so let's get started with the actual general premise and structure of situational judgment when it comes to the UCAT. Okay, so situational judgment is just a very light section which just involves your raw worldly and raw moralistic understandings in order to evaluate solutions presented in clinical and or learning scenarios in medicine or dentistry. So pretty much what I really just mean by that is that you're using your world knowledge, you're using your judgment and everything, and situational judgment. You're using your world experience and you're sort of like, I'm not going to say social skills, but I guess sort of say like your understanding of people and your understanding of like the world and this environment and how to act in certain situations, and also just simply moral sort of like, you know, your ethics, your morals and everything. And you're pretty much applying both of those sorts of, all those factors actually to evaluate solutions and also rate factors and everything in like the scenarios they kind of give you. When these can be clinical scenarios like medicine, like in the hospital scenarios, or learning like at a university, and applies to both medicine and dentistry. So yeah, that's that. And you're given 66 questions for 26 minutes. And that's if you're in Australia, that's equivalent to 0.3939 minutes per question, which is around 23.63 seconds per question. And then you can actually simplify that to 20 seconds per question. And for UK students, it's just a bit different. So it's actually 69 questions and you have 22.6 seconds per question. So you just have 3 more questions, same time, but it really doesn't matter. 22.6 seconds per question, simplify it to 20. I want to sort of mention as well that don't immediately fret. I already can say that this section is just a bit easier overall, and I'll explain why in a moment. So you don't have to worry about the time necessarily. But yeah. So also very importantly, so very similar to verbal reasoning, it's actually quite the same sort of idea overall, actually, in terms of just the structure. So the idea is that you just simply have like a text, aka like the scenario. So the scenario is presented through a text and everything. And the idea is that these questions that they give you, most of these questions and everything will actually be attached to their own respective text. So you're not going to get like one text, one question. You're going to have multiple questions attached to the actual same text. And what that actually ends up meaning for you overall is just merely with, as it was for verbal reasoning, that you don't consider timing as in like, okay, well, it's 20 seconds a question. You want to consider it as a bunch. Consider it as a text and question sort of time and everything. And that, of course, is actually very important because it actually affects your timing overall and everything. And I'll explain as to why in a later video, but you can just imagine that if you're considering it as a minute and 20 for 4 questions, it's a bit different to considering as a minute and 20 for the text and 4 questions. You're omitting a reading of the text, which of course will take some time. So that'll all be discussed later. And overall, you get 22 scenarios text, okay? And they sort of like divide it up, and I'll explain to you exactly what that really means. Because if you just follow the math and everything, you think there's going to be 3 questions per text. It's not actually exactly like that. So a quick discussion of question types as well. So there are 3 different question types, and one type actually contains 2 subtypes, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And it's all dispersed in a relatively predictable pattern. So it's not going to be like, oh, one type here, then another type here, it's all random. Sort of like you can kind of predict, well, it is kind of random in that sense where like, you know, it's dispersed, but you can predict how it's dispersed as opposed to doing a test where it's like this type to start with and the other test, the other type to start with, it's random. No, it's a bit more predictable and everything, and you can kind of get an idea. So, and also just wanted to mention as well that when it comes to the actual question types as well, so for 2 of the question types and everything, you're going to have a range of 2 to 6 questions attached per text within that question type. And I like to call this a bell curve structure. So what I mean by bell curve structure, I basically mean like the distribution of how many texts have 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 questions. It goes like a bell curve. So what, and you know, if the bell curve, if you don't recognize, is like, I'll try to draw it with my camera. It's like this. It's like, it looks like a bell. It's kind of like that. Kind of like that slope sort of thing. Kind of like I'll draw I mean, I can't draw it here, but you can kind of see like what I'm trying to trace out with my marker and everything. So like kind of like that and everything. And the idea with that is pretty much what I'm trying to say is that the most common question types and everything are just like 3 to 4 questions. If you imagine that I was like to list it along the bell curve, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and I draw it there and everything, then you know the idea is that majority of the texts will have 3 to 4 questions attached to them. Few have 2 to 5 attached to them. Fewer have 2 to 5, and honestly, I've actually very uncommonly seen 6. Like I've looked at so many tests, I've had so many students talk to me about their tests as well, and 6 seems to be extraordinarily uncommon. But of course, I can't absolutely verify because I don't have my students counting how many questions they get per situational judgment text in the exam. That's kind of, yeah, I mean, I can't really expect them to do that when they're focusing on their own exam. But yeah, it's a section as well, similar to decision making, similar to pretty much every single one except for verbal reasoning, in which your marks can actually improve by just simply using tips, tricks, and external tools. So actually just understanding the right ways to approach questions, understanding the tips, little tricks, like understanding exactly what those are very appropriate things to do. And what I mean by that, I'll mention in a moment, like, oh, the very appropriate things to do, what you understand about that and everything, like, you know, tips in terms of like, you know, how to understand what is like, you know, a bit more in between, how to like approach and think about certain scenarios, and external tools such as, you know, asking for help from like medicine students. But I'll talk about that later as well, because pretty much these are all clinical situations, and medical students obviously will know how to behave relatively well in these sorts of situations. You can give the situational judgment test to a medical student and expect them to do quite well in the actual test overall. But yeah, all discussed in future videos down the line, and of course in my lessons as well, if you would like to go book for that. But yeah, so moving on to the next sort of point right here, there's going to talk about situational judgment question types, okay, here. And in fact, I just made a little error here and there as well. So I wrote, as mentioned previously, there are 3 different types of questions for situational judgment, not abstract reasoning. So I actually did a quick browse to actually try to fix all the errors and everything in this PowerPoint, but then just simply writing and just grinding for so long. In fact, I had like 30 minutes of sleep. I literally didn't sleep last night because I was at like a event for one of the societies I'm at university, and because of that, you know, the strain is hitting, and I did make some mistakes. I did miss it even though I tried, but I do apologize for that. But I did try to clean it up a bit more this time. We have 3 different question types for situational judgment, and the frequency of each question type varies for the third question type compared to the first we discussed. So pretty much you have 2 question types which have very similar types of questions, and the third one is like kind of like random, kind of like a random sort of question type or something like that. It's just like, not random, but it's like it's much less common and everything. So you get like, say, 30 questions for one type, 30 questions for the other type, and like 6 questions for the final type. Okay, so what are the actual exact types of questions themselves? So I'm going to go through the first type of questions that we actually have. And the first types of questions that we actually have are the appropriateness rating questions. So talk about the structure quickly. You have a text, and you have a text, and then for the actual question itself, they're going to give you like a response. They're going to say something like, to ask the patient whether he is feeling okay or not, or something like that. And then from there, you are required to determine the overall appropriateness of the response. So how good, how appropriate that response is and everything. And there are two actual subtypes, which you can get from this sort of question. One in which you choose between a 4 scale. So basically you have 4 different, it's like 4 different sorts of answers and everything. Because when they say choosing the appropriateness, they sort of like give the appropriateness on a scale from like a very appropriate thing to do to like a not at all appropriate thing to do, a very inappropriate thing to do. And when I say 4 scale, I mean like it's that scale and it's 4 like answers long and everything. And then you also have this other variation, which is a 2 scale. So instead they give you like an appropriate, inappropriate scale, but instead there's only 2 sorts of options in the scale. So it's much more simplified and everything. And I'll show you guys an example in a moment. The 4 scale response is much more common than the 2 scale response. So the 4 scale response is actually much longer and everything in terms of how many questions you get overall. You get around like 25 of those, and like the 2 scale ones you get like 5, and maybe even a bit less than that overall actually. Okay, so that's the first type. The second type of questions are actually the importance rating questions, okay? So the thing is that they're very similar to the appropriateness rating questions in that you get a text and you get like a certain like line or like a response, except instead of being given like a response, so to say, for the question, you're given like a relevant factor. You're given like a factor. It's like, so they're gonna say like, okay, so here's like this person who's doing surgery right now, and he's made a mistake. And then like and then they're gonna give you like a factor saying, you know, he needs to consider how much blood loss the patient has experienced or something like that. I don't know. And the idea is that you're going to be asked actually, so it's a relevant factor to the scenario. So that's relevant, as you can see. And the idea is that you're going to be asked to rate the importance of that factor to be considered in that situation. So they're going to give you factors like, oh, to check on the blood patient's levels, or to check his phone to see if he's gotten any messages or anything like that. And even though that sounds ridiculous, I have seen things that are quite ridiculous as well, similar to that. And of course, they're very easy answers. So yeah, you're asked to rate the importance of the factor, as I mentioned, and it's going to be on a 4 scale. So just 4 options and everything graded. It's like a scale graded from very important to not at all important. It's just simply a sort of like a scale from very important to not at all important, and it's 4 answers long. And it's about as common to the appropriateness rating questions and everything, okay? So appropriateness, so not appropriate rating, appropriateness, sorry. Okay, and the third and final type of question are just simply the most least appropriate type of question. So in brackets, most least appropriate type of question. It's actually very similar in premise to the actual appropriateness rating questions. So you get like the text and the response, except this time what you've done is that what they're doing is that they give you 3 responses at once. And then what you have is that you're going to be asked to give the most appropriate response and the least appropriate of those responses. Like you literally are going to be getting responses in like sort of like bars and everything, and then you drag like, you know, the most appropriate tag and like the least appropriate tag. You're just simply rating which one is the most appropriate response and the least appropriate response. And this is actually a very sparse question type. This is the third type I was talking about before. You have like 5 to 6 questions on this. It's kind of light. And I want to mention as well that when it comes to these appropriateness and importance rating questions and everything, they have a 2 to 6 question range, arranged with a bell type, as I mentioned before, where the 3 to 4 questions per the actual scenario or text are the most common, as I mentioned. And the most or least appropriate, in brackets again, most or least appropriate in apostrophes, those question types are actually standalone. So you're not going to get like, oh, a text and like 3 scenarios and then most or least appropriate, and then you get like another block of 3, not 3 scenarios, but like 3 responses, and then you get like another block of like 3 responses. You don't get that. You simply get 1 block of 3 responses and everything. And that's pretty much, you move to the next question. And that block is all 1 question itself, if that makes sense. Okay, so those are the question types. And now I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by those question types. So this is actually the appropriateness rating question. And this is actually the 4 scale subtype. So you can see right here, a text. And then they ask you, how appropriate are these responses? And then here's a response: urging Daryl to report the cheating to the medical school. And then you pretty much just have 4 sorts of responses and everything. And this is what I mean by 4 scale. So it's like a scale from a very appropriate thing to do to a very inappropriate thing to do. It's like a scale going from down to up or up to down. In this case, down to up, if you want to look this way. And the idea is that you're going to have 4 options. That's why I call it 4 scale and everything. And same sort of thing right here, except it's just a 2 scale. And then you have appropriate or inappropriate and everything. So it's just 2 parts long and everything. So that's the appropriateness rating questions. And those are the ones that actually, I mean, honestly, to me, they're pretty fun overall. At the end of the day, the situational judgment is a very chill section. You really get to chill with that, but I'll talk about that in an exact moment as well. In a few moments, sorry. Here's now the importance rating questions, okay? So the importance rating, same sort of idea. You're getting the text, or similar idea, the text. And then now they're going to give you how important to take into account are the following considerations. And they give you like factors, or in this case, like, considerations. I call them factors, they call them considerations, same sort of idea. There are alternative treatments for sinusitis for this person who's having difficulty using nasal spray, if you end up reading the actual area right here. So pretty much it's like the 4 scale as well. So it's ranging from very important to not important at all. And the idea is that it's 4 parts long. So very important down to non-important, or non-important to very important. So lots of different sorts of things. And also I want to say as well, the questions are sourced from Medify UK, of course, the premier question bank, and the only one that you should ever be using for the UCAT unless you run out of questions, in which case I have other books to suggest for you to use. Okay, and now here are the most appropriate, least appropriate question types in situational judgment. So the idea is that it's just very similar to the appropriateness questions in terms of the text and the fact that your responses and you're given responses and everything, and you're asked to sort of like assess the appropriateness, except this time you literally, as you can see right here, you're choosing the most appropriate action, the least appropriate action that John should take with this guy who looks to be annoying people in class, some of these people who look to be annoying him in class, or other people in class. And then you have 3 sorts of options right here, most appropriate, least appropriate, and then you sort of click and drag these options. So you're doing this exam on a computer, so you're kind of like clicking and dragging these options and choosing to like the most appropriate box for the one you deem to be the most appropriate, and you're clicking, dragging the ones that you feel are like the least appropriate to the actual, the one that you feel is the least appropriate to the least appropriate box and everything. So that's a very simple, very easy sort of question overall. But of course, some difficulties people might face. And also I want to remind you as well that these actually simply occur as one question. So you only have like the text and you have like this block of 3 and that's it. You don't have other blocks of 3 or anything like that. Okay, so let's actually discuss the timing, because the timing is actually very important. So when it comes to the timing for situational judgment, you have 26 minutes for 66 questions in Australia and 69 questions in the UK, same sort of time. And of course, I've already told you guys how that breaks down. So 23.63 seconds for Australians and 22.6 seconds per question for UK students. But then we all just end up just simplifying it to around 20 seconds anyways, because, it's just a bit more complicated if we try to actually think about it by actually going towards decimal places. It just makes it difficult for all of us. And of course, as I mentioned before and everything, because you have multiple questions attached to the one sort of text and everything with the majority of the question text, then ultimately it's actually very important to actually consider timing as a text and question combo. And, that's going to be important for maintaining timing, because again, if you consider it as 4 questions per minute and 20, you're going to be, your timing is going to be much less accurate than if you would consider it as a text and 4 questions in minute 20, because the other time you didn't actually even count the text. And of course, you need to read the text and that will take time. Okay, so that's that point right here. And this is the main sort of point I really want to say as well. So this is actually what you should apply from this. So if you, instead of using a time of 20 seconds a question, instead have it for 20 seconds multiplied by the amount of questions and everything for the text, and that'll give you the time for the text and question combination. So don't just count it up times about the question, 20 times about the questions, and consider that to be the time. Consider it to be the time and question combination with that time that you ended up receiving, okay? And of course, as I mentioned before, the questions for the 2 types and everything, which can have multiple questions attached to them, they range from 2 to 6 questions per text as well. And the thing is that you actually bell curve idea. And I'm not going to actually list out the times and everything, but it does range from 40 seconds to 2 minutes. I think you can do the 20 times 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 by yourself and everything. So yeah. Of course, I want to mention as well that actually there is a minimal variance of time for question type as well, because most questions are uniformly difficult. And I guess a better way to say that is that most questions are uniformly easy and everything. They're not actually too difficult at all. It's actually very, very chill. But I guess, a slightly more time should be used with the most or least appropriate type of question type, because the thing is that, you're reading the text of the question. Of course, they'll use a bit more than 20 seconds, but it's just very marginal. And a general time of 20 seconds is very, very acceptable and everything. So that's pretty much what you really want to focus on and everything. And yeah, so that's the actual timing part of it. Now I really want to talk about the actual marking as well. So now onto the actual marking part as well. And this is actually where it's kind of important as well, because this is actually a slightly different sort of marking system compared to the other sections as we sort of discussed and everything. So pretty much just to start off and everything, it's actually very different, compared to other sections in which that it actually, from what I've been seeing and doing calculations with myself, it actually follows a mostly scaled approach. So actually a single question right will actually have different impacts depending on the total overall score. So that's actually very important. So what I mean by that is actually, so I use the HSC example and everything, where like, say you get like 50 out of 100 in the test, overall marks, like the original mark, and they scale it up to 80%. It means that 1 mark is worth 1.6%, but then you go do and get 80 in that test, 80 out of 100, they make it 90%. So that means that 1 mark here is now actually worth 1.125% or something like that, right? And pretty much what that really means is that that mark sort of varies depending on your overall total score. And for what I've been observing, and I'm going to sort of like show you a bit of evidence later as well, I do actually believe that there is actually a bit of scaling that actually occurs here and everything for these sorts of things. So I really want you all to pay attention to that. And all questions in situational judgment are worth the exact value at 1 mark and everything. But then I guess each mark in terms of how much it's wasted, or maybe in fact weighted, sorry, or in fact maybe even the actual value itself. So maybe it's actually not worth 1 mark, will actually vary depending on the question type based off its difficulty. So it's distinguished highly from other sections by this manner. So this is actually so important to actually discuss and everything. It's actually very, very highly distinguished from other sections. We remember from the other sections that it's no scaling, 1 mark's with 1 mark, each question worth the same mark, worth 1 mark, and they're all worth the same, except for digital decision making, which had like a slight variation with those yes no questions being worth 2 marks instead. But at least fundamentally, most of the questions were worth 1 mark, and each mark counted the same. It seems to be that there may be something different here. Okay, so that's very important to discuss. And this is another very important point right here. Moving on to this third point. Very important to note that actually partial marks or half marks and everything are pretty much given if you're 1 off on a 4-scale question, okay? So that pretty much means that you're choosing 1 degree off another answer. So pretty much you're just like one side off and everything. So for example, as I mentioned right there, if you get the answer is very important and everything, and you choose important, then that means you still get a half mark and everything because you're 1 off. And actually has very, very important implications for guessing and everything. And yeah, and also I want to mention as well that I really do mean 1 off. Say the answer is important, you choose very important or only a little important, so kind of like going up or down, it's within 1, so it means you still get partial marks and everything. And understanding that will be very important for how you guess and everything, but I'll talk about that in a moment. So as I discussed and everything, 66 questions for the section in Australia, 69 for the UK. I'm just going to use the actual UK one and everything because it's more relevant to UK students, this section especially. So with the score range of 300 to 900, it's going to be 8.69 score per question by doing the difference divided by 69. And obviously you consider as a whole, you're going to be like, oh God, I've got like 8.69 marks per question, or score per question, sorry. You want to consider it as just a whole. It's just like, oh, okay, well, for the entire section, I got like, I got like, this, and I ended up adding to like 660 or something like that. So that's very important. And of course, the score is not actually relevant. So not, of course, sorry, but it's not actually relevant. And I'm going to discuss it later because there's actually a bit of a different sort of way they sort of like grade and bring scores together and everything. And of course, I can't even actually ensure that each mark corresponds to the actual given specified score, because the thing is that the actual varying values actually vary and everything. So not only do the actual marks vary in their order of worth and everything potentially, but each question actually may not actually have the same value of 1 mark. So there could be a lot of mess here and everything. I wouldn't even say unlikely, so actually correcting that. Sorry, it's not unlikely. It's actually quite likely that it's so, and we'll show you as to later. And of course, we just simply take the 8.6595 though, and just take it as an average. Then actually, the questions in situational judgment, they have the lowest score to mark ratio. And actually, it's just more, and really, this is actually what I really want you guys to take from this, because just the overall questions, like pretty much just think about it, instead of looking at the score, if you're a bit confused, think about it as the highest questions in terms of time. So it has the lowest score or questions to time. No, sorry, not like that, but it has, sorry, just ignore that I said that actually. I made a bit of a mistake there. I forgot about abstract reasoning. So just looking at the score to mark ratio and everything, looking at how little the score is worth per question and everything, it's very, you can see that it really emphasizes very light thinking processes. And it's not, you're not meant to actually think in detail or anything. You're meant to simply use like very speedy, very rapid fire, just rattling the questions off and everything for mark A and everything. And the reason for that is because at the end of the day, what they want you to do is be intuitive. Well, you don't have 10 or 20 seconds or a minute to process exactly what you want to do in real life. When you have a situation and everything, you sort of respond to it quite quickly because it's just the way life is, it just moves on. So they want you to sort of like do that sort of same idea here. They want you to just use that sort of like quick, reflective, intuitive judgment, which you sort of use your world awareness and morals and ethics for in order to actually do. And that's why they have it like this and everything, with very, very quick sort of questions and the low score to mark ratio. Alrighty. So this is what I was actually about to say as well. So the marking is actually very important here in terms of the fact that it doesn't actually, so even though you can get a score from 300 to 900, you aren't given the actual scores as such. It is not going to actually say you get, well, you do actually in Australia get like a score, but in reality, what's actually more important is the fact that they actually decide to range a score into bands, and these bands, they actually arrange them from 1 to 4. Okay, so that's actually very important. They range the bands 1 to 4. And pretty much band 1 is the best band. It goes down. So band 1 is the best band, band 4 is the worst band. And of course, it's going to be very important for you to seek either band 1 or band 2, irrespective of your country. But in fact, it's much more strict in the UK. And I'm going to try to explain as to why that is. So pretty much as well, I wanted to mention that there are no definitive score bands, range for certain bands and everything. So it's only generally sort of estimated. So there's no, I can't actually say specifically that, you know, you can get like 52 or something like that, or like a score of 700 and you're going to get band 1. You can only really sort of estimate, and this is what many websites have actually attempted to do as well. I guess what you can do as well is that you can actually explore by percentiles and also just investigate the scores for each decile, and then you can just sort of extrapolate from there. And I'm actually going to sort of, I can actually do that for you. I'm going to show you that, and I'm going to show with that as to why it's quite clear to me that there's some scaling going on, or each question doesn't actually have equivalent mark, like, you know, each question isn't actually worth 1 mark, or the mark weightings aren't actually exactly the same. And of course, this is a backwards marking, and I still never get it, never will. And luckily here as well, you don't have any backwards marking or anything like that. Very, very simple. Okay, so here are the actual scores and mark ranges, but these are estimates and everything, okay? So this is actually pure estimates based off things, and I don't really wouldn't really exactly trust these, but of course it's very good to just get a general reference score and everything. And of course, if you see like some wraparound and some equivalencies between tables, you can sort of be like, okay, well, I can trust this a bit more, but it's meant to be used as like a quick reference. So the top here are the table for the UK, and the bottom are the table for Australia, sourced by Blackstone Tutors and a medicine education website right here, respectively. And for the UK right here, pretty much you get band 2 or above, 36, 38 or above, and for band 2 above in Australia, 37 or above. And, you know, obviously for each individual band as well, you can see the score ranges here and everything. But, you know, you can kind of see that getting around 50%, just a bit above 50% and everything gets you band 1 or band 2. And that is exactly what you actually really want. So you got to really mess up to really screw up here. But for the most part, it should actually be okay. But of course, that's still not a reason to get complacent. Okay. So this is actually the most important part as well. This is actually what I really want to explain, especially for UK students out there and everything. So what do you actually need to score? Okay, so this is actually very important. So the first point right here, so it's very, very similar to verbal reasoning and everything. Situational judgment is actually weighed very differently compared to other sections in overall how you do in the UCAT and everything, and how they sort of value your UCAT performance. They really emphasize situational judgment. So pretty much in the UK and everything, it's a very strong point of emphasis. So many universities, which I'm about to go through and everything, actually have bare minimum thresholds for situational judgment for any consideration. So I mean, like if you get below this threshold, they won't even actually consider you, no matter how good your UCAT is. So if you got like 3,600, but you didn't get a good situational judgment score, it goes below the threshold, you're gone. Okay, so that's actually very important. Or at the very least, so I'm not going to give you like a very hard and, you know, evil strict threshold and everything. What they actually can also do is that they actually just weigh it much more strongly than other sections, like what they do for decision making. It's like, oh, well, they're going to make this worth like 40% instead of like the 20-20-20-20-20 distribution that it should actually have. So very important to actually discuss, and I'm very important to actually understand that, especially if you're a UK student out there, that you really need to do well in this section. And it just reflects overall the attitudes from different countries. UK a country, or UK, sorry, just sort of region and everything that actually just values doctors having more personal qualities, whereas Australia actually has more academics, and it's reflected by the different UCAT scores and the more emphasis of situational judgment, which is at the end of the day all about personability. Okay, so UK universities having bare minimum thresholds. So I've given a few examples of here. So Anglia Ruskin actually does not accept people with a band 4 score. So if you get a band 4 in situational judgment, then you can actually expect to just not have any sort of chance. And actually, there are many other incredible universities that actually offer this. So I don't really know too much about the UK because I'm not from there, but Edinburgh, Leicester, sorry if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, and Liverpool. These universities just don't consider you if you're like a band 4 student and everything, okay? They only consider you if you're band 3 above. And then it is a threshold, luckily. So if you get above band 3, you're on the same playing ground for situational judgment compared to other students with their situational judgment scores. So whether they get band 1 or band 3 doesn't matter from there, but it is a threshold that you need to beat. So Manchester just a tiny bit more strict. They automatically reject band 4 students and they actually prioritize, but they even then, it's still not that easy. They actually give priority to band 1 and band 2 students above band 3 overall. So pretty much if they've actually found that they have found some students and everything in band 1 and band 2 that they're very happy with, then they'll continue on and no spots get filtered out to band 3. You only can really get that band 3 look and everything if you actually just end up getting a look as a band 3 into Manchester Medicine. If you actually just simply do well in band, if you simply if they find that they don't really have good candidates who got band 1, band 2, and they naturally sit down to band 3. But then you can imagine that people who get band 1 and band 2, they're going to do pretty well in the UCAT. So I wouldn't really rely on that. And of course, there are some other universities as well, as I mentioned, that just place increased weighting on situational judgment. So Birmingham, so they actually have a separate mark on the section. So that actually doesn't necessarily mean they have increased weighting, but honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they do. So they actually have like a separate mark that they award you. So the UCAT's like worth like, 40 points or something, and situational judgment, they have their own mark, and overall, all the marks are the same. So there's a chance, and they could make it high weighting and everything. Another university, Hull York, actually weighs situational judgment with a 27.27% weighting, and that's instead of the average 20%, because remember, consider that you have 5 sections. So in reality, if it was equal, it'd be 20, 20, 20, 20, 20. They do it with 27.27% here. Nottingham has a 55.55% weighting, which I thought was actually quite ridiculous. So many universities with their own different philosophies, even in the UK itself. But overall, you can see overall that they do actually care quite a bit about your performance in situational judgment overall. It's quite a pretty clear point of emphasis which they're putting in. With Australian universities, it's actually not entirely too clear. So the thing is that it's a bit more unknown. It actually appears to be that it's actually not that important of a section. It just appears that very few universities actually even look at situational judgment anyway. So when I say few, I mean like 1 or 2. So I'm not exactly sure the number, but from what I've last been seeing, around 1 or 2. And when they actually do care, it's just about you passing that minimum threshold set at band 4. And as we showed previously as well, you can pretty much not get a band 4 by getting like literally more than 30%. And with the actual partial mark system and everything, I gotta say, it's gonna be pretty hard for you to actually get less than 30% unless you're clicking randomly. And by probability, you probably can click randomly and actually get kind of close to 30% anyways. So yeah, the average really should be around 50 to 60% for any sort of student. I think any student should be able to get 50 to 60% with bare minimum practice. But anyways, so talk about the average score, as I always do. In Australia, it's going to be 568, but that's just a score. The median band was actually band 3. So the middle, so if you took the middle person and got their band, it'd be band 3. And that's actually not what we really want. The top 46% get band 2 or higher. In UK, in terms of the score and everything, for 2022, we don't actually know that because they're not actually released by scores, they're released by band. The median band in the UK was actually band 2, and the top 56% got band 2 or higher. So actually the median there is, so you were the average student, you're the middlemost student and everything, you can actually expect to get band 2 or high, which I guess is quite reassuring, because if you just want to see yourself as average actually, funny enough, is good enough. So I usually say as well, average or slightly above average is just not really good enough. You want to actually aim for the threshold required for medicine or dentistry, but actually in this sort of situation right here and everything, especially for Australia, average is slightly above average is quite good enough. So because of the limited emphasis and everything, getting that slightly above average is a good enough score. So as long as you just get band 2 or high, which is slightly above average, as I kind of mentioned there, you will actually be perfectly fine. In fact, I myself got band 2 passing on to band 1 or something like that. It's a pretty hard section, and I'm about to show the distributions. It's actually pretty hard to actually get into like that top band and everything in terms of just pure percentages of people who actually get that. Now, for the UK, however, with the increased emphasis on situational judgment, then actually it still remains, though, that with above average, average or slightly above average, it's still not good enough in everything. So actually, I want to set a reference point for you guys to all achieve and everything, and that'll be the sort of score that's good enough for all medicine universities, because with the UCAT being actually easy and everything, I want you guys to aim as high as you can. And with the sort of weighting and marking system and everything, for example, Nottingham and everything, they sort of weigh 100%. So with the way they weigh it, you actually get 100% score for band 1 and 75 scores for band 2 and everything. So I don't really consider that it's good enough for you to get 75% of the UCAT, because that actually won't really get you exactly where you want. In fact, just a quick calculation means that if you get 75%, you only get like 2,800, which is below that 2,900 threshold. And which means that, you know, I don't think it's good to aim for band 2. I'd say band 1 to be safe and everything. So really aim for band 1 to actually make it your goal band, and really try to aim and try hard for that one, because it is so much more important to do well at situational judgment when it comes to the UK. And actually, this is sort of what I want to say as well. So if I were to use like mark extrapolations and kind of like try to work magic there and everything, you actually find that it doesn't actually look like the marks across questions themselves are equal, and they're actually maybe scaling for the marks themselves, or at the very least, you know, the marks, as I mentioned, are just not actually equal, or they have like different marks for different questions. So this is kind of what I mean and everything. So here's the sort of mean scores for situational judgment. You can see right here that the mean, which is sort of got right here, was 568, and it kind of ranges from 519 to 663 for the 90th percentile and everything. So that's from the official UCAT website and everything. That's your average, 568. And also here's just like a sort of another compiling of like the averages and everything for 2019, 2020, and 2021. To add to that, 592 in 2019, 592 in 2020, 581 in 2021. So kind of like 600, right? And just that's kind of like, and just giving you the averages as well. And now actually giving you the distribution of applicants for bands for situational judgment. That's actually not Australia, sorry. That is actually the UK. My mistake in actually writing that, just a bit of like a mistake, and just like, you know, the sleep, as I mentioned again, just, you know, stayed up the entire night to go to that sort of house sort of event and everything for a society. And that pretty much meant that I wasn't actually able to actually be 100% accurate, but hopefully I can improve on that. But pretty much, as you can see right here, distribution is at band 1, band 2, band 3, and band 4 and everything. You kind of generally notice that it's like the top 50%, they get like band 1 or band 2 and everything. So kind of like a 50-50 split. But of course, there's some variances. 2020, you get top 66%, you get band 1 and band 2, and that's so good for you. But yeah, top 50% seems to be a common sort of thing. 50 percentile gets you band 1 and band 2 at the very least, which is something always good to go on. And I'm going to flick back here and everything. And this is sort of like a quick proof as to why I think there's like different scalings. So pretty much, if you consider that, so we remember that in order to actually get band 2, so I'm just going to do a quick reminder for you, that in order to actually get band, let's make it band 1 actually. So in order to get band 1 for situational judgment, they say you need to get a score of 56 out of 66 or something like that, 57 out of 66. Okay. So if we were to convert that from a pure sort of marked score sort of situation, 57 to 6 out of 66 is kind of like, to keep it simple and everything, I'd say it's kind of like 5-6. Yeah, 5-6. So if you take 5-6 of 600 and everything, that means that you actually need to just get 600 divided by 6 plus 5, which times by 5, which is 800 score. And pretty much 800 score and everything in order to get a top 20% mark and everything, apparently, right? But then the thing is that if you actually look at the actual percentiles and everything for Australia, but of course you can imagine it's going to be similar to the UK, then actually you see right here that in order to get the actual 8th percentile, which you need in order to actually get top 20%, you only need 639. And I calculated as 804 using a direct question to mark analysis. So that actually kind of means to me that there must be something funky going on here. I strongly believe that they actually weigh questions differently, or they scale, or they just simply make each mark actually just not actually be equal or something like that. They have like different weightings for the markings themselves, or different weightings to the questions themselves. But that's just like a quick sort of like quick goofy sort of thing I wanted to point out and everything, my personal sort of proof as to why I do think they do not have like a regular marking system for situational judgment. But anyways, aim for the top 2 bands, and that's important. Okay. So quick summary and everything. Situational judgment is just a section which just involves your understanding of the world, in addition to just your moral and ethical sort of perspectives and everything, to evaluate actions, so evaluate the appropriateness of actions, and just rate factors and everything in terms of importance in clinical and also educational situations, such as in a university or in a classroom, in like a hospital or something like that. I'm not too sure. Okay, so 66 questions in 26 minutes for Australia, 69 to 26. Simplify that to 20 seconds per question. Main bulk of questions, as well as we have discussed previously, are not just simply like standalone questions. With the main bulk of questions and everything, they actually have those questions as well. They have like, with the main bulk of questions and everything, they actually have the actual questions from within that sort of main bulk and everything, they actually attach themselves to a text and everything. So even though all questions, all 66 or 69 questions are associated with text, the thing is that when it comes to a majority of the questions and everything, it seems to be that they overall do not stand alone. It seems to be that a few questions from the overall main bulk attach themselves to a text each time and everything to form that main bulk, okay? And of course, that timing, it affects the timing and everything because you want to consider as text and time as opposed to text and questions, as opposed to just simply questions. In order to get the time, you get 20 seconds and multiply by the number of questions to get the amount of text time for texts and questions. And 22 scenarios, and that means 22 texts in total. And of course, because of the fact that the questions are of similar difficulty, it means that you can just use the reference time directly for most of the time. A bit of water, sorry. Okay. So 3 different types of questions and everything for situational judgment, and a reminder of the appropriateness rating ones and the importance rating ones. They're actually by far the most common sort of question type and everything. I'd say that they probably take up like 60 of the questions and everything. Note as well that each question may actually not be worth 1 mark. They could be varying marks based off the difficulty of the questions, or the weighting of each mark could actually be different as well. And the total mark, in fact, also the total mark to form a score may be scaled. So just be very, very aware of that. Partial marks are offered. Half marks, I do believe, in everything if you're 1 off the correct answer and everything. So up or down, 1 off. Okay. And of course, emphasis for situational judgment, especially in the UK, you have the minimum thresholds and the high weighting, or the high weighting. Also, I want to mention as well that you don't aim for scores, you actually aim for bands, with bands 1 to 4, where 1 is the best and 4 is the worst. The goal band for Australia, is just band 2 or higher, because it's not as important as I discussed before. And for UK candidates and everything, the goal band is 1 because of the high weighting. And of course, also there's minimum thresholds for blocking out those students who are in band 4 or even band 3 potentially, or just giving them, as I should say, less opportunity if the band 3 and everything. So it's actually very, very important to be careful and aim for band 1 and everything. Okay. So now heading towards the actual conclusion of the lesson as well, just a quick sort of reminder and everything that I actually do offer discounted private or group tutoring, discount with the YouTube sort of factor as well. And you can access that link if you actually want to be tutored directly by me as well. And I do have a full lesson plan ready and everything for you guys to all learn from. You can also just look there and everything, sort of just get an idea of my credentials, and also just get a general idea of just simply who I am as a person. You can also just simply go there as well to just simply contact me and find my contact details to contact me for this tutoring, or just contact me with any sort of questions that you actually may have regarding the UCAT. There'll be a link, obviously right here and everything, which you can just type right in. Also link in the description, and also in fact a link to a Discord community which you can all learn from, or join and learn from, in order to advance your sort of understanding of the UCAT and ask questions in the national community. Of course, in that community, you can directly ask me questions as well. So that brings us to the complete end of the actual 5 sort of introductory sort of videos and everything to get you guys taught in sections for the UCAT. So that will actually conclude the video now. And just remind you all, to score 3,000, you need to aim for 3,600. Love you all. Bye-bye.